I just got my pack of Ilford Gold Fibre Gloss in A3+, which is 13 by 19 inch. And we're going to edit a photo, clone out some power lines, add a bit of grain, and then print it at 12 by 18, which is this big. Okay, so this is the photo that we're going to edit today and print on Ilford Gold Fibre Gloss 13 by 19 A3+ paper. First, I'll find the photograph. Let's make a virtual copy, and we're going to 0 star that one. We'll go into the develop settings and hit reset. This will give us the raw file as it looks like from the get-go. Okay, so my goal with this photograph is, because it's such a dramatic sort of mountain landscape, I want to create something that is striking on print as well. So we can really use that sort of contrast and the negative space and the triangles in this sort of composition to really make something that's visually striking to look at, especially with all these snowy sort of shapes up here. This is Mount Edgar Thompson. You can find it driving along Mount Cook Road up to Mount Cook Village, and it's about 2,379 meters, I think, which is about 7,800 foot. Absolutely massive mountain. Okay, so first off, we'll do a bit of black and white processing. Now, in all my videos, I tend to edit using the Tri-X profile from Visco Film 01, but for this one I think I might actually do a standard black and white, and that way you can sort of follow along and see how I do it. So first off, I've just clicked the black and white profile there. What I usually do with black and whites is I generally just choose standard sort of daylight white balance, and then I go from there. So first thing you can do with a black and white sort of landscape, rugged landscape like this, is crank up the clarity, which really helps to define all the edges in the photographs. It even brings out sort of areas that sort of were drifting off into the shadows. So that's the first thing I do, and sort of a happy medium I find for black and whites is anywhere from sort of 15 to 35. You really have to be sort of careful with it not to sort of overblow it like this, even though I don't actually mind that result, but it's a bit heavy-handed for me, so I'm going to crank it back to the 35. We really want to play with this sort of exposure area up here and sort of use these as silhouetted shapes in the photograph while not making them too dark for the print. So the first thing I'm going to do is bump up our exposure. I'm looking actually up here in the histogram. We can actually see that the exposure, it looks kind of nice, but it is actually too dark for the print, and even for the photograph. So what I'll try first off is a one-stop overexposure. Okay, so we can see that it hasn't overexposed the actual raw file, but it has brought up the levels of the snow right up to where they probably should sit, which is a high reflectance. When you're in the snow, you've got to be really careful that it doesn't overexpose on your digital sensors. Luckily, this one has sort of been a bit underexposed, so we really get some good detail to push up into the highlights there. But the obvious thing is that we want to make sure that it doesn't actually become white, otherwise we've sort of overexposed. Now I took this, it was actually more of a snapshot. I was actually just running around here and making some photographs, and I saw this beautiful sort of triangle, layered triangle composition, so I took the photo of that with the 50mm lens, f8 at ISO 200, which is the base, the native ISO of the Leica-M, and at that settings it was 1/750th of a second, so I didn't have any problems with camera shake or anything. So okay, so we'll turn that off. I'm hitting the I key, by the way. That sort of toggles through your sort of image details and camera settings. Unfortunately, with the lens that I've got, it doesn't register on the Leica-M that I've got, but it's the Voigtländer 50mm Nokton f1.5 lens. Really nice lens. Okay, so we've got our exposure up into the right areas. I'm just looking at the very darkest areas of this, and you know, it's actually what I want to be careful about with the print is not making the blacks sort of sink into the blacks, especially when we're dealing with ink. So I do want a little bit more contrast, so what I'll probably do is bump that up to 20 just to see what the effect of that is. Yeah, I think that's pretty nice. Now this right side area is a little bit darker than the left, and I think for balance I do want to sort of make them roughly even. So what I'm going to do here is grab the shadow brush and bring it down to -50 just to start off with. We can, once I've actually painted in that sort of effect, we can dial it in. But I'll grab that, make a really big brush and just sort of paint in there. So I might actually undo that and put my flow down to about 36. Make this about 30. Now I know what it's going to do, so I can start sort of painting that shadow area just to bring it back a little bit and emphasize this area. Now that is a bit too heavy-handed, so what I'll do is just bring that back to about -10, and I think that's looking roughly even. I might just paint a bit more down here, a bit more up there, and maybe just a bit there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. What I do want to do is emphasize these snowy sort of edges here, just to give a bit more impact. So I'll grab my flow and put it back up to 100 because I just want to paint straight. Reset the shadows and just bump up the clarity to say 30 for now, and we'll start from there. We'll bring our brush size down and just start sort of painting. We can see that it's starting to sort of deepen those edges and just bring out a bit more definition. Okay, and I'm really just focusing on those sort of snowy areas just to enhance those. As you can see, the clarity brush or the clarity effect can actually have a little bit of an effect on the exposure of an area, so you really got to be careful just sort of seeing what happens when you brush over it. See that? It actually brings the whole area up. So whereas if I paint over this, it's really just enhancing the edges. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's just zoom out. I just want to see the overall composition. I can see from the overall composition that this area is a little bit darker, whereas this side is not, and I think that's just something we can tweak. It's just a bit too dark. So I'm going to make a graduated filter just on that sort of corner and bring the exposure up by about 0.2. Whoops. It could probably come up a little bit more. 0.4. Okay, that's good. It just evened out that corner there. Okay. It's looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is just bring down the exposure of this. It's a little bit distracting, and even this one too. So we'll grab the highlights, pull them down, and just sort of paint over this rock face there. Maybe pull it down even more, and with the whites as well. And then we'll also do this reflected light surface here. And I'll just have a quick scan. Yeah, that's good. Here we're really just tweaking the exposure across the image to really emphasize what we want to push for, which is those massive, amazing looking mountains. Now there is one matter to take care of, and it's this power line. One thing you can't escape when you're driving along this road and making photos is the power lines that run along the whole thing. So what I want to first do, the problem with going in and cloning out things is that if you do it in Photoshop, you've now lost the ability to edit your original RAW file. So I really want to make sure that either I do it in Lightroom, or if I do it in Photoshop, I've got my actual final image pretty much set up, and then I can just do the final clone out and then be ready for print. So now that as I'm already in develop mode, I'm going to hit the S key. This will bring up the print proofing. For this paper, because I'm using Ilford Gold Fibre Gloss, I'm going to choose this one. So as you can see just there, I've switched from the platine, and you can see the Ilford Gold Fibre Gloss is actually a little bit brighter in its color gamut, or rather its printing gamut. So that's actually good, because I want those sort of bright areas to really pop. What I might actually do, I'm just looking up at the histogram in the proof, and those white areas are really quite bright, but I could possibly make them a little bit brighter. So the thing about proofing your images for final print is that you really want to think about what you want to convey, and I really want to convey the sort of majesty of this mountain, the scale of it, by almost treating these snow caps as a sort of a crown on top of this this mountain. So what I then have to do is bring the blacks back down, possibly the shadows. We'll just have a look what happens. Yeah, that's good. The blue is sort of going back down into the blacks, but that's okay. Our main shadow area is still above the fold. So what I might do is just fine tune that setting to about 18. Yeah, I think that's really nice. Just check the detail in here. Before we go into any Photoshop, I'm going to set in my sharpening setting. I usually set it to about 45. You can see the detail just came out a little bit more there, but you want to be careful that you don't create this sort of sharpening, obvious sharpening effect that you can get. I'm going to leave the noise reduction, because I do actually want a little bit of the camera sensor's natural texture in there. This is the kind of thing that you'll see in the print. Okay, I'm just switching back and forth between the print proof and the actual digital file, and I think that looks really nice. I've filled up my highlights and I've filled up my shadows without going beyond the bounds of the actual print. So now I'm going to take it into Photoshop and clone out these. So edit in Photoshop. Okay, so now that we're in Photoshop, we can get to cloning out these power lines. There's two ways of doing this, well, two primary ways of doing this. One is using the healing brush. This is a really quick method. You can actually just grab the brush, paint over this, and if Photoshop is thinking right, it will actually do pretty much exactly what you need. Is just sort of fills in the areas using the textures and the shapes surrounding it. It's not always perfect, you have to sometimes tweak it, but the other way, which I'm going to use for this, the actual lines themselves, is to select the area with just a little bit of a margin, maybe 1 or 2 pixels, and go right to the edge, just like that. These are so faint that you can actually almost get away with it, but I think you would probably see these in the print. So, okay, coming in there. what I'm going to do is just start at one end and do the other side. So once I've selected those, unfortunately it actually goes across some of these rock features, so I'm hesitant to see what happens, but let's do a fill. So we want to do edit, fill, then we'll choose content aware. I've never looked into what actually that does, but we'll just leave it ticked. Okay, so let's deselect that. It's done an okay job. It's a little bit soft, you can sort of see, but I think that'll be okay, because the area is so full of texture anyway. So let's go to the other side and do the same thing. Just meticulously going across the edge so that you don't take away too much of the surrounding area and fill that in. We really just want to get rid of only the pixels where the lines are. Now you can use this for other things as well. Sometimes you just are in an area that you can't get away from civilization. Okay, so the shortcut for this is Shift F5, content aware, hit OK, deselect, and just see what's happened in there. You can sort of, I can notice the signs of it, but I don't think you would have to worry too much about anyone else seeing the sign of it. Let's zoom back out. No, I think that's really good, so that's done a relatively well job on that. Now there is one final step which I want to do, which is a bit more advanced. It's actually adding some film grain to this in a really subtle way and actually increasing the print resolution of this photograph. What I'm working with here is a 24 megapixel Leica-M file, so it's not exactly 24 megapixels because of Bayer sensors and sort of processing algorithms. So I actually want to increase the resolution of the print, and that won't actually increase the resolution of the photograph itself, but it'll just add a bit more to the print. So what I'm going to do is take that up to about 7,000 pixels wide. You'll notice it gets a little bit soft, but what we're going to fill it in with is a subtle layer of grain. So what I'm going to use for this is the Google Nik collection, which is now bought by DxO, I think. And it's currently free, so go and grab it if you want. Silver Efex Pro is a black and white sort of processing tool, but it has one of the best grain algorithms you can find. This is the user interface. What I want to do is ignore everything else except for the grain controls here. So at 500 it's basically grainless. Once we start to bring it down, it starts to add in that grain. If I bring it right down, you can see it just looks horrible. But I probably want to just add a little tiny bit of grain. So I'm going to bring it in at 400. Oops. And we'll just slide back and forth between hard and soft grain just to see what it looks like. Now, for this kind of photograph, when I'm printing it in high res, I don't want to get rid of the sharpness and the detail of the image. I'm really just filling in sort of the softness of some of those pixels with detail that will sort of be in the print itself. And I think that looks pretty good. Let's turn that off and on just to see what happens. Yeah, I think that's kind of nice. Okay, so now we'll hit OK. That'll go and process it. And you can just see there that it's just sort of filled in the detail with some texture. If we zoom back out, we've now got our final print. I'll go ahead and save that. And we'll quit Photoshop, get back into Lightroom. And here is our final TIFF file. if we go back into the print proof, we can see that we're still looking good on the print proof. I'm just going to 5-star that one, and I'll put a yellow filter. Yellow filter is my marker for print ready photos. Okay, the final step is to go into the print settings. I haven't actually printed on 13 by 19 inch paper yet, so I'm going to create the profile from scratch. What I first want to do is set the page setup to horizontal. A3 plus, that should be correct, I think. There we go. Ooh, we got some area to work with here. So I know exactly how big I want to print this, and that's 12 by 18. So what that ends up with is a 1/2 inch margin all around the borders. A perfect fit within this paper. So what I'm going to do is just reduce those margins to 0, or the minimum, and we'll dial in our exact height and width of the print. So that is 12 inches by 18 inches, and that fills the paper. Now what I would use this for is a 12 by 18 frame, which are quite easy to source in high quality frames. So alright, so that's given us our print layout. Now down to here, 720 ppi for our print resolution on the Epson P600. We've got our glossy standard sharpening because the print media type is sort of a semi-gloss. Everything else is good. Let's go into the printer settings and let's turn on the printer. Okay, the printer's turned on. I've loaded up my A3 plus paper. Now we've got to choose our print settings. So I've got premium semi-gloss black and white preset, which goes ahead and sets the media type to Epson premium semi-gloss. We've got advanced black and white photo printing, neutral color tone, photo 1440 DPI printing. Turned off high speed, don't need that. And let's give this a shot. I've never printed on A3 Plus yet, so I'm keen to see what it looks like. Okay, some observations. The edge detail is really nice in here. The blacks are pretty much exactly how I wanted them. They sort of disappear a little bit around here, but that's not a big deal because the rest of them have all this sort of little shadow details here and have sort of evened out the shadow level of shadows in this area. So the actual brightness of the photograph's quite nice. It perhaps could have been a little bit brighter on the high end, but otherwise, I think it's really nice. These edges here could have perhaps had a little bit more definition. And there's pretty much no sign that there are ever power lines sitting around here, so that's really nice. That's a good result out of that. Well, I'm really quite happy with the result of that print. I think there are a few areas where I could really fine-tune it, but I think all in all it came out exactly how I did it on the screen, so there's nothing to complain about. That 13 by 19 inch paper is perfect for sort of medium-sized prints, especially 12 by 18 because you get a little bit of that margin. And that Ilford Gold Fibre Gloss is one of my favourites. It's a really beautiful sort of paper. It's got a warmish tone, but it's a beautiful paper for black and white prints, especially sort of grainy textured prints. I've used that sort of paper for my Tri-X film photographs, and they just look beautiful on it. Because you get a little bit of luster, sort of sheen, but you also get a little bit of texture in the paper as well. Now, one thing I want to sort of mention is just how important I've found printing to be in my workflow, but also my photography, sort of to really make me understand what I'm working for when I'm out in the field looking for these sort of compositions. And the reason I keep mentioning the word composition is because up until now, like I've always had the skills from doing graphic design and stuff of knowing what I'm looking for, but it hasn't really been too sort of conscious in my thought when I'm taking landscapes in the past. And you really it really helps to define exactly what you're looking for when you're taking photographs in landscapes. I've got quite a few prints on my wall. I'll sort of take you for a bit of a tour here. These are sort of my earliest ones from Kentucky in Europe. I got these done really cheaply on canvas, 12 by 12 inch. And we've got Venice, and then Paris, Florence, and London. This is a print by Yasira Musa. I love this print. When I saw the photograph, I had to ask for a print and a frame for that one. This one is by Ryan Belk. He's a photographer in the US, and I saw this and just needed it. It's such a beautiful photograph. Really simple, black and white, and it came fully printed and fully framed. Now I won't go through the whole house because I've got quite a few prints, but this is from Mount Cook National Park, the same area, just driving up and down, finding different things to shoot. And finally, one of my earlier sets of prints. This is on the way to Mount Joyce, and I shot this out of the car at 80 k's an hour, I think it was, at about ISO 3200. It was first light, and even though it is a little bit soft, I really like this photograph. And there's actually two other frames that have a similar sort of theme, so I've sort of kept them on the wall as a reminder. And I hope you got something out of this. Printing is really important to sort of teach you how to frame a composition and sort of look for different elements. So like, subscribe, and share if you want. And I'll catch you next time, hopefully out on location. Bye.